Welcome, everybody. Thank you for braving the weather tonight. Make sure that as you leave, whenever you're leaving, that you drive safely on the way home. We'll call this meeting to order. Lacey, are we in compliance with open meeting laws?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. And if you could please call roll.
Commissioner Clements? Commissioner Farrar? Commissioner Johnson? Commissioner Lyons?
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine?
Here.
Commissioner Zer? Here. Commissioner Bika?
Thank you. We'll now move on to our Pledge of Allegiance. Helping us lead the Pledge of Allegiance tonight is Jackson, a first grader at Northwoods Elementary. He is a motivated learner, especially in reading and math. When he completes his work, he eagerly looks for challenges, sometimes extra math and sometimes extra long books. Those are my favorite kind of books. After Veterans Day, Northwoods collected pocket change from everyone to raise money and send veterans on Freedom Honor flights to Washington, D.C. At first, Jackson willingly donated half the money in his piggy bank to the cause, but by the end of the collection, he had donated all his money from his piggy bank to help the veterans. We appreciate Jackson's positive attitude and work ethic, and we admire how he showed empathy and gratitude to others with his donations. Jackson, thank you for being here and leading us. Those of you who are willing and able, please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic which stands, a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jackson. At this time, I would hear a motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Our agenda is adopted. We start, as always, in our agenda with recognitions. But rather than turning it straight over to Superintendent Johnson, I get to begin tonight. Because tonight we welcome a new student representative. That student is Mira Bortle. She is from the Eau Claire Virtual School. Mira is a 9th grader who lives with her parents and 2 sisters on East Hill. She has 3 cats that keep her on her toes. Mira likes learning, listening to a variety of music, and reading fantasy books. I already told her that we're gonna have to talk about her favorite authors because that's one of my favorite genres. Some of her hobbies include playing chess, video games, and painting. And after Mira graduates, she would like to get a job doing computer coding. Mira, on behalf of the whole board, I'm sure every one of us will say it to you anyway, welcome. We're really glad to have you here. Look forward to you representing your classmates in the virtual school. And now I'll turn it over to Superintendent Johnson for the remainder of our recognitions.
Thank you. We've got 3 left. Dr. Nordine. Oh, first of all, good evening, Chair Nordine, board members, student representatives, and distinguished guests. I guess what's a December school board meeting without talking a little bit weather? The recognition I'd like to share is for a variety of folks here in the district and out Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday were very difficult days in the district. And I think our student transit, our buildings and grounds, our communications department did a fantastic job. You know, starting early in the week with student transit with Jim Phi, Ray Phi, Marty Klukas, taking a look at webinars, participating in webinars. It was really, I think it prepared us fairly well to the decisions that we had to make on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So I'd like to thank them, as well as Thursday we had received a call. Kim Kohler had received a call. I had received a call from city county government with an emergency to be able to help those in need with all the power outages. So again, to city, county, government, XL Energy, all sorts of folks. So I think the community really rallied. I think the district really rallied. And again, thanks to student transit for keeping those kids safe when they were on the roads last week. Starting off with recognitions, got 3 of them tonight. Giving Tree from Memorial High School this year marks the 14th anniversary of the establishment of the Memorial Giving Tree. It started with an idea of how we could help our students in their time of need in a timely manner. Over the years, we've asked, and parents, staff, and the community have answered with their generous donations. The money is used wisely and goes directly to the needs of the Memorial students. During the 21-22 school year, the donations helped with the following: providing funds for basic clothing needs and clothing for job interviews, eye exams and glasses, purchasing of prom tickets, yearbooks, and school field trip expenses, purchasing grocery gift cards for students who are food insecure, purchasing bus passes for transportation to school and to work, and purchasing basic necessities for students, the giving tree. Next up, Soaring High with Northwoods Elementary School. Each week, students and staff at Northwoods recognize students showing soaring high behaviors. The students are recognized on the announcements each Friday, and we share a group picture in our newsletter. In addition, each student receives a postcard home from the staff member acknowledging how they showed respect, responsibility, safety, or cooperation. So far this year, over 250 postcards have already been sent. Luke Stordahl, Northwoods principal, is here tonight to accept this recognition. Luke, after the next one I read, we'll have you and the other person being recognized. The picture with me and a certificate, so I hope that's okay. And finally, we got the Wisconsin Baseball Coaches Association Hall of Fame. Locust Lane Phi Ed teacher Bob Johnson will become one of 6 individuals inducted in the Wisconsin Baseball Coaches Association Hall of Fame in February in Madison. Bob is a former Eau Claire North baseball coach. Retiring from that position in June, he led North to a 307-79 record and earned 9 Big Rivers Conference titles, 8 WIAA state tournament appearances, including 2 state championships in 2011 and 2019. In 2011, he was named the Wisconsin Baseball Coaches Association Coach of the Year. Bob is here tonight to accept this recognition. Congratulations, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Next agenda item is the public forum. Tonight, we had no one sign up to address the board, so we'll move directly on to this evening's regular reports. We'll start, as always, with our referendum committee, Commissioner Lyons.
The referendum committee did not meet, no report.
Thank you. And Dr. Johnson is not able to be with us tonight, so we will move directly on to the consent agendas. For each of the consent agendas, the board acts with one vote without discussion. Items on the consent agenda have been discussed at a previous meeting, or the board has been provided background material. If there is any item that a board member would like to discuss, it will be pulled out of the consent agenda and voted on separately. Tonight's superintendent consent agenda includes human resources employment report, payment of all bills in the amount of $3,936,698.38, and net payroll in the amount of $4,727,125.70 for the period of November 1st, 2022 through November 30th, 2022. Gifts in the amount of $290,813.97 for the period of November 1st, 2022 through November 30th, 2022. 5-year capital projects and 5-year capital projects bids. At this time, I would hear a motion to approve the superintendent's consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Lacey, when you're ready, if you could conduct a roll call vote.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Farrar,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordin,
Yes.
Commissioner Zer.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the board's consent agenda. Tonight's board consent agenda includes the minutes of board meeting December 5th, 2022, and administrative contract adjustments. I would hear a motion to approve the board's consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. When you're ready, Lacey, please conduct a roll call vote.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Farrar,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordin,
Yes.
Commissioner Zer.
Yes.
That The consent agendas are approved. We're moving right along. We'll get into our next segment, which is tonight's focus on results. Tonight we have focus on results from the elementary and middle schools. Turn it over to Mandy Van Vliet.
Good evening, Commissioner Superintendent Johnson and everyone that has joined us this evening. Tonight we'll be sharing with you a presentation on focus on results with a focus on elementary and our middle schools. Two schools have joined us for tonight's presentation, Principal Keaton from Mans Elementary School and Principal Colip, and two instructional coaches, Lana Leonard and Colleen Morgan from South Middle School. And they will come on up when it's their turn to speak. I will be first starting us off. Well, actually, I'll just wait for a moment to get the presentation. That's okay.
Be on your screen should move. Just the arrow.
Okay, here we go. So I will first start us off tonight with connecting our work to the EMLSS and the Teaching and Learning Strategic Plan. We'll talk about how Mans Elementary School and South Middle School are implementing the third scale. And then we'll be sharing system level data from R2 and address any specific questions that came about from the 1128 board. I will start us off with Eau Claire School District's equitable multi-level system of support framework. This is a layered approach to meeting the needs of all students, regardless of where they are at in their learning journey. Implementation of an EMLSS system of support means providing equitable services, practices, and resources to every learner based upon responsiveness to effective instruction and intervention. Schools providing varying types of supports at differing levels of intensity to proactively and responsively adjust to the needs of the whole child. This is our vision for how we will meet the needs of every child in the Eau Claire School District and create equitable outcomes for all students. And hopefully by now you're becoming very familiar with this slide. In order to have this fully implemented into our schools and across the district, we have developed the strategic plan over a number of years of conducting multiple root cause analysis to understand the gaps that exist in our district and schools to better understand why we are not meeting the needs of all of our learners. We recognize we currently do not have all aspects of the EMLSS framework in place, and we are unable to meet the needs of all students with how we currently function in our system. Therefore, together, with input from many, we developed the Teaching and Learning Strategic Plan. This plan strategically outlines action steps that will implement the EMLSS framework across the district and in schools. A closer look at the strategic plan. A strategic goal has been established to measure the progress and effectiveness of our work, and I'll just bring your attention here to the strategic goal. Schools, in collaboration with teaching and learning and other departments, will provide equitable services, practices, and resources to meet the needs of every learner in ECASD by 2029. We have identified two focus areas that will help measure our progress as we go. Focus one is the first layer of the EMLSS, the universal layer. We want to create a strong universal level with the goal of more than 80% of students meeting benchmark. Our second focus is on creating the continuum of supports so that tier 2 and tier 3 supports are in place at all schools. When students need something more and different, we want to layer on additional supports. These are the additional layers of support that in a healthy system, only 20% of students would need. Next, I will be sharing with you data that will help understand the progress we are making towards these two goals. To measure our progress of meeting 80%, the district will use forward exam ELA data for grades 3 through 8 as one of the indicators of success. State assessment data provides insight on the health of our system in meeting the needs of all students. As part of our strategic plan, the Teaching and Learning Department has created a progression with short-term ELA goals using this data so that we can monitor our progress. Our goal for the 21-22 school year was to surpass 42%. And as you can see indicated by the orange bar here, the green circle, We met this goal. Our goal for next year is sustain this growth and to increase to over 45%, again, with the ultimate goal of being at 80% by the year 2029. Has been a trend in our district that when we increase as a whole, our underrepresented groups also increase. In order to close the gaps, our underrepresented groups need to grow at a faster rate. When we examine this data, students who are American Indian, Asian, Black, and 2 or more races grew at a higher rate than students who are white. To close the gap, our goal is for underrepresented groups to grow at 1.5 times more than their comparative group. Students who are American Indian, on the side here on the graph, Asian, and 2 or more races met this goal of growing more than 1.5 times their comparative group. This data is used to strategize around the gaps in our system. As we examine the students that are economically disadvantaged, receive special education services, or receive EL services, we recognize the gaps that exist amongst comparative groups. When the Teaching and Learning Department analyzed these groups with additional variables, such as economically disadvantaged and race, it leads us to areas that teaching and learning along with buildings need to target and specifically strategize around. Now switching over to our math data. To measure our progress in meeting the needs of 80% in the area of math, the district will use forward exam math data for grades 3 through 8 as an indicator of success. As I have shared, state assessment data provides insight on the health of our system in meeting the needs of all students. As part of our strategic plan, the Teaching and Learning Department has created a progression for math as well, with short-term goals and using this data to monitor our progress. Our goal for the 21-22 school year was to surpass 39%. And as you can see by the orange bar here, we have met this goal. Our goal for next year is sustain this growth and increase to over 42%. And again, continuing to grow year by year. Like ELA, it has also been a trend in math that when we increase as a whole, our as underrepresented groups also increase. In order to close the gaps, our underrepresented groups need to grow at a faster rate. When we examine the math data, students who are American Indian, Asian, Black, and 2 or more races grew at a higher rate than students who are white. To close the gap, our goal is for underrepresented groups to grow 1.5 times faster than their comparative group. Students who are American Indian, Asian, and 2 or more races met this goal of growing more than 1.5 times their comparative group. This data is used to strategize around the gaps in our system. Digging into the data a little bit more, we examined our students that are economically disadvantaged, receive special education, and receive EL services. And although the gap is not as significant as with ELA, we recognize there are also gaps in math that exist amongst comparative groups. When we analyze the groups with additional variables, such as economically disadvantaged and race, it leads us to the areas that teaching and learning along with buildings need to target and specifically strategize around. So bringing us back to focus 1 and 2 and how we're going to continue to support our students is through that focus 1, or creating a strong universal system. Many of the gaps identified and the areas we need to target are not new to us. These 2 areas were designed to address these gaps and create systems of support that will meet the needs of students. Next, I will share with you the priorities we have identified for this year with the 2 focus areas that we are going to work on to address these gaps. I will first start with focus 1. Universal level is the level that all students receive. We want this level to be strong and rigorous, and yet delivered in a way that meets the needs of individual learners. We recognize we need to improve the quality of instruction students receive so that students achieve at high levels and we close achievement gaps. This past summer, a work team identified the systems that create high quality instruction. These 3 systems here are on the screen: guaranteed and viable curriculum, professional learning, and instructional delivery. When these 3 systems come together, we can ensure that high quality instruction is occurring in the classroom. The first system of having high quality instruction is a guaranteed and viable curriculum. Delivering high-quality instruction starts with identifying the academic standards, behavioral expectations, and social-emotional competencies. High-performing districts have done this work to establish a rigorous, guaranteed, and viable curriculum. By doing so, this reflects a commitment to both excellence and equity. A focus for the Teaching and Learning Department this year has been getting our guaranteed and viable curriculum in place. We have been working to create a curriculum writing cycle, which includes program reviews, and that curriculum writing cycle would be putting content areas back on a 7-year cycle. We have been working on establishing a curriculum writing process that regardless of the content area, all content areas would go through the same curriculum writing process, and teachers would become familiar with what that process looks like. Priorities for the actual curriculum writing are listed below. We have been focusing on curriculum writing for pre-K-12 in ELA, 6 through 12 for math, K-12 social studies, 6-12 physical education, K through 5 for art and business and marketing. And some of these came about because we knew that they needed our attention and required them to be a priority, and others were a continuation of things that happened the year previous. The next system as part of the ECASD's instructional framework is professional learning. Professional learning, we have defined it through the summer work is in these 4 areas. So those 4 bolded areas: mentorship, professional development, coaching, and collaboration. Tonight, I'll spend a little bit more time digging into the coaching and collaboration. As you know, we have invested significant resources and positions to instructional SEL coaches, literacy SEL coaches, instructional coaches across all levels of our system. So one of the things that we have done as a teaching and learning department is regularly scheduled meetings customized by level to support these coaching positions. So really supporting our coaches and understanding what their role is a coach and helping them and build that capacity for them to turn around in the building and support the teachers in their building and what they are working on. So we're supporting the coaches so that the coaches can support the staff based on individual needs and school-based goals within their school. The other thing that by bringing in the coaches on a regular basis, it allows them to collaborate with each other and learn from one another, talk about what's working well in their buildings, perhaps strategies that they're trying with certain groups of students, and it builds that community amongst them as a coaching group to be a strong professional learning community and a strong group of educators that we can rely on as in our district to move our needle forward, but then also to move their own buildings forward as well. The next piece that we're working on is through collaboration, is establishing collaboration structures to support district, school, and team needs and professional learning. And this one is quite significant when we think about collaboration structures that need to be in place to support collaboration that needs to occur within professional or between teaching and learning, human resources, administration, so that we are a strong team, as well as the collaboration that is needed between district and school, between us as a team of administrators, bringing teacher teams together, and bringing different groups of similar positions together. So for example, bringing all of the interventionists together. So creating those structures that allow for that collaboration is quite challenging in a district our size. So one of our focuses is thinking through those structures that need to be in place that allow for that collaboration to occur. The second piece of that is when we do have those buckets of time for those groups of people together, is making sure that meaningful work is occurring during those times. So that sounds like a little task, but it is quite a significant task, is thinking through all the different layers and levels of collaboration that we want to have in place to support the work of implementation of the EMLSS. The second piece on there that I highlighted is the last bullet there is our professional learning and instructional planning days. We have 6 of them built into the ECASD school calendar. So as teaching and learning department, we think carefully about those days. The AM part or the morning part of those days is allocated for our building professional learning. So building leadership teams and principals plan the professional learning for those mornings. And the plan for that is built around their school improvement plan and based on what the needs of their staff are in order to move their building forward. The afternoon is for instructional planning for teacher teams, work teams to come together and collaborate around unit planning and curriculum and talk about what's working in their classroom, what struggles and challenges they may have. It also provides us an opportunity to do the curriculum writing and bring district-wide teams together to work together to do the curriculum writing. It's also a bucket of time that allows us to provide professional development and training to our teachers. So for example, the past one of the days in November, Heather Grant and Academic Services brought together the team of interventionists to provide them some professional development on what they needed, and also gave them an opportunity to share additional needs that they have so that we can plan professional learning for future PLIP days. And that's just a sliver of some of the work, but hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the work that we're doing in order to support the professional learning of our staff. The last system of the instructional framework is the instructional delivery. Some of the things that we're doing, so if we think about the ECASD instructional framework, the first step is having a guaranteed viable curriculum so that teachers have the resources that they need. The second piece is providing our teachers the professional learning that they need so that they can then deliver the instruction to our students. So when we think about the work that we're doing there, school improvement plans have identified action steps that include culturally responsive teaching practices. Our unit plans, as we're writing curriculum, incorporate differentiation options to meet the needs of all students. Representative curriculum writing teams identify and incorporate social emotional competencies and technology integration. AVID strategies are being implemented across all of our middle schools, and Principal Kohut will talk a little bit about that when he shares what's happening at South Middle School. And we also definitely have a focus on using high impact technology tools to engage our learners. The instructional delivery will be a priority for us as a teaching and learning department, working closely with buildings for the 23-24 school year. As we think about that focus 2, which is the continuum of supports. So after the universal or the tier 1, universal instruction of academics and social emotional learning that all students get, some of our students need more and different. And that's where our tier 2 and tier 3 supports come in. If you recall, when I shared this information with you in October, not all of our buildings have tier 2 and 3 supports in place. So when we don't have tier 2 and tier 3 supports, and we have students in need, which we do, we're not able to meet those students' needs when we don't have this continuum of support in place for our students. So our goals, our focus 2 goals for this school year have been to allocate and coordinate high quality staffing to implement interventions so that building level supports are in place. So really, so our buildings have the resources that they need in order to meet the needs of our students. We want to identify and develop intervention resources so building level supports are in place, and then to establish data rules and processes for tier 2 and tier 3. So that processes is so a student is we're digging into the data, we're understanding the child's needs, exactly what are their needs, how do we layer on that support, what does that system look like so that student has that support in place. We're monitoring that child's progress and coming together on a regular basis. Is it working? Is it not working? Do we need to adjust? Did the student learn the skill? Do they no longer need the support in order to be successful? So that's what that last bullet is, establishing those data rules and processes for tier 2 and this slide is hopefully becoming familiar to you as well. This is one of our focuses also as a teaching and learning department as we think about programs, practices, roles, and expertise. Being aligned and coordinated are key words for this year. And we want to be aligned and coordinated as a district level team, working closely with our principals and working closely with our teachers and instructional staff to provide equitable services, practices, and resources to every learner. And so this is definitely a goal of ours in order to create change and hopefully our student outcomes change from this work. So with that, I've shared a lot with you what we're doing at the district level, and now I'll be handing it over to Adam Keaton, and he'll share a little bit about what they are doing at Manns Elementary.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really excited to be here, and I can share with each and every one of you that in the 22 years that I've been an employee of the Eau Claire Area School District, this is my first opportunity to present in front of the board. So I'm excited to be here and share some knowledge with you. So like Mandy had said, my name is Adam Keaton. I'm the principal at Mans Elementary School. And tonight, my time with you is really focusing on focus area 1, which is that universal piece. So something that at Mans Elementary School, we're working hard to learn more about and leverage are those 4 key features that you see underneath that green box that says focus area 1. So as Mandy had shared earlier, my time tonight is really thinking about and sharing with you information related to the strategic plan and through that lens of universal instruction. So you're going to hear information about 4 key features within that equitable multi-level system of support. So the first part, which if you will, think about this as a cyclical process, but the first part is collaboration. So how do we prepare ourselves and then sustain the dialogue with our teachers to ensure that we are taking a deep look at and examining those important 4 questions up there that were established by DEBRIef. So as a school and as I know as a district, especially as a principal team, we're spending a lot of time digging into and revisiting the book Learning by Doing. And one of the common themes that comes up often is, like I had shared, those 4 big questions. What do we want students to know? And the things we want students to know are those standards in the content. How will we know if they've learned it? And we analyze that through our assessments and our data. What will we do if they already know it? We create opportunities to differentiate and give students that experience to get deeper into their content and the standards. And then how will we respond as adults if they don't know it? And that's, as Mandy had talked about, focus area 2, thinking about our interventions and our supports that we layer on for our students. At Mans Elementary School, we also spend a lot of time talking about collective efficacy, and that's something that I'm very passionate about. I kind of think about it in the sense that we do well because we think we can. And so we focus a lot too. In the upper right-hand corner, you see a book by John Hattie. He has some excellent research out there about things known as effect size and what moves the needle for students in terms of that achievement. So we spend a lot of time as adults thinking about what are the effect sizes and what things do we leverage to ensure students achieve at high levels. So the first part of our work is that collaboration, and that happens through that PLC lens, that professional learning community. So as a building, we meet weekly, and during that carved out sacred time, we look at those 4 questions and we establish our conversations around data and instructional practices. The second key feature is what Mandy had talked about, the guaranteed and viable curriculum. And within the universal, that's something all students have access to. Every student at Mans Elementary will receive and have opportunities to access that guaranteed and viable curriculum. And so we achieve that through our resources. And at the elementary level, my time tonight is really focusing on math. We use a resource called Math Expressions. In addition to that, we have district access to things known as pacing guides for our grades. We have district-created essential learning outcomes and teacher-created I-CAN statements. In addition to that, with part of our guaranteed and viable curriculum, we also have common assessments. So we are aligned both horizontally and vertically. And I know the arrow with the text there is rather small. It's really more for effect, which is showing you that we have really an articulated math program from grades K through 8 that is anchored in both standards and key areas within mathematics, with an ultimate goal at the elementary level and a little bit into the middle school level, which is to help students access algebra, which is a really kind of a key academic area for students in our district. So really the guaranteed and viable curriculum piece is kind of that art and science of teaching. So the science piece of it is the standards, the curriculum, and the assessments. And the art of it is how our teachers use their skills as professional educators to connect with kids and show them and unlock those keys to learning. Something that we're really excited about, and we'll be doing some of this work again in January, is using something known as the coherence map. So if I brought it tonight and I rolled it out on the floor, it would actually look like a wiring diagram. But really what it is it's a K-8 progression of standards in mathematics. And it's a fascinating document that we have access to on SharePoint. But ultimately what you can see up here in a little bit of text is the grade band, the major domain, and there are between 4 and 5 major math domains that exist at the elementary level, as well as the standard. And so what we'll be doing as we talk about vertical alignment in math through our professional learning at MANS is looking at a specific standard in a specific grade and seeing how it connects to grades before it and to grades after it. So if we notice through our data that we have a student that is struggling within a specific standard, and we use our data and our assessments to tell us that, we can kind of run the clock backwards to find out which standards did that student might not master all the way back to kindergarten. And it's a fascinating journey when we look at, you know, as students progress through the elementary school levels, we'll even notice that a student that is showing us that they don't have a concept mastered yet in 5th grade could be due to something that they didn't master all the way back in 1st grade. So the coherence map really helps us do some of that work during our PLC time. And again, just a visual representation kind of the connections between the grade level, the domain, and the standard in particular there. So you can see the big domain is something known as number. I share a 4th grade example, numbers and operations in base 10, generalized place value. So that's a big part of the 4th grade math curriculum is understanding place value, but then recognizing what the standard is and then what the student-friendly I can statement is. So we get to see what the adult teacher language is, but then also what the student-friendly language is, so the students can see and can understand what is expected of them. So this is some of the work that we're working on through that guaranteed and viable curriculum. Another tool and another resource that we have at the elementary school level is our essential learning. So within SharePoint at each grade level, we have access to this document, which shows not only a time frame, so a bit of a scope and sequence when we should be getting through some of our resources and material, as well as the standards, the learning targets, and as well as resources to provide our staff with differentiation should they need it or require it. So things like prerequisite skills, things like Dreambox, and those differentiation strategies to help kids continue to stretch their thinking as mathematicians. So this is part of the adult work, if you will. Key feature 3 of the 4 is known as high quality instruction. Again, something Mandy had shared earlier, something at MANS that we're working through and working on. Bottom left-hand corner, there is a book study that our math team engaged in last year and we continue to visit this year, which is titled Productive Math Struggle. And there are some really incredible tools and strategies that are helping our staff recognize our students as math thinkers, which is a really fun process. And this leads us up to our high quality instruction. So as you can see on this slide, these are the 6 pillars of math through that productive math struggle. So identifying ourselves as math thinkers and calling ourselves mathematicians in our classrooms helps students build confidence. Talking about the value of struggle, and it's okay for things to be challenging. But when we create the conditions and the climate in our classroom where it's okay to struggle, then our students flourish in that environment. Building that community in that classroom where struggle is encouraged, and we want for that, helps kids recognize that again, it's okay for things to get challenging academically, and we want for that. We want that rigorous experience for all students. Tonight, I'll spend just a little bit of time about a strategy that we're using at MANS, which we call Math Protocol, something that we've been working on as part of our school improvement plan at MANS this year. And then again, the other 2, supporting productive struggle during instruction, and then being reflective learners. That's a very key feature to math instruction as well. So just touching just briefly on what a math protocol is. And again, the idea behind a math protocol is that we want our students to engage in dialogue, and we want our students to have that math conversation, but they need to learn how to do that first. And so we teach them the tools for dialogue, and then we provide them the time and the space and the forum to have that math dialogue and that math conversation. And we've noticed that this really builds some pretty fantastic math dialogue in our classrooms and math engagement. And what it also allows our teachers to do is free themselves up to be facilitators of knowledge rather than that person in the front of the room delivering instruction. So it's really exciting work. It's hard work that we're engaging in. But we have some pretty great collective buy-in from our staff at MANS, and our students are really having a lot of fun in that environment. So that's what a math protocol is in a nutshell. And just some examples of the tools that we use at MANS, and these are district resources as well. But we're teaching our students to have these mathematical conversations, and we're encouraging them to think through the lens of making and presenting arguments. So we're asking kindergartners through fifth graders to present arguments and have that dialogue as math thinkers in the math classroom. And that really boosts our student engagement, which has been really fun to participate in and to lead. Here are a few just specific examples of some of the protocols that we're using here at Manns Elementary. And so as you can see, they're partnered up. Our students are partnered up, and we teach them what it is that we are asking them to accomplish. And in some cases, one student might be solving a problem using a one type of strategy, and the other is solving that problem using a different strategy. And then they collect their answers and they discuss those, and they have that great rich conversation. Or we talk about if, as you can see, the protocol to the right, you can see where students are being asked to agree or disagree. So we're teaching those dialogue, those skills of recognizing whether something is correct or incorrect, and doing that in a comfortable, safe way. So this is a lot of the work that we're doing during our instruction at Manns. And again, another example with some student work with multiplying fractions. And again, what we're trying to accomplish is that math rigor, that math engagement, and seeing our students as math thinkers for themselves, which is very exciting work. I'll apologize in advance. The audio is probably not going to be quite loud enough for you to hear the student dialogue, but I just want to show you about a 24 to 25 second clip of what this would look like in a third grade classroom. So I'm just going to cue this up quick for you so you can kind of see what it looks like.
Actually, right, this was that's so much strategy. This one was two tables with 4 buses.
Okay, apologize for the audio, but as you can see in the video, you have two students working together. I don't want to say the teacher's nowhere to be found, but she's somewhere in the classroom, or he's somewhere in the classroom. And the students are having that discourse through that math protocol. And it just really creates a lot of great math engagement within our students. Finally, the final key feature is that strategic use of data. So getting back to kind of what the adults are doing in the building and going back to our do fours 4 questions. Our building is focusing this school year too on making sure our teachers are trained on how to independently access the data warehouse, which is our instrument, our repository for all things student data. So this instrument allows our staff to pretty efficiently and meaningful have data-rich discussions as they get together through their PLC teams once a week. So generally speaking, when our teachers are meeting, they're meeting around student data, and they're having those rich conversations around how our students are performing. Now, one of the other things that we're also working through together is thinking about that equitable lens. So how are we recognizing that we have students in our school that are maybe not hitting those standards or showing us what they know? And then what are we doing as adults to learn what we need to offer them differently so that they can be successful in our classroom spaces? So a book that we found to be incredibly impactful, and this is something we're reading together this year, is Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. So what it does is it marries cultural learning that our staff is going through, but then also the brain research and the neurology behind how our students think and why they think the way that they do through that cultural lens. So it's a fantastic read. And just I grabbed a few quotes from that literature. That's something our staff is reading collectively, our entire staff. But it's an excellent read. And then just kind of a quick screenshot of how we and what our data looks like to us at Manns Elementary and district-wide. So I grabbed a screenshot of one of our common assessments in mathematics. And as you can see, those are the standards. And then down at the bottom, you can see how we spend time drilling down to make sure we're being as analytical as possible. But being data rich doesn't necessarily tell us or guide us on how to meet the needs of all of our learners. So that's why we again, cycling back up to the previous slide, that's why we're leveraging that reading, the Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain book, to help us recognize what we can do as adults to help make sure all students are successful at Manns. And then just a final screen share of our data there as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Principal Kolb and his team.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Mandy and Adam. Thanks, board, for allowing us to speak. I'm Trevor Cole, principal at South, and I brought along Lana Leonard and Colleen Morgan as our two instructional coaches. So at South, we're gonna talk a little bit about. You're gonna see some of the similar slides that you saw already. Is our presentation is a little bit on Focus 1 as well. We have Focus 2. We have a little bit of work going on there in our Tier 2 team, but we wanted to show you some examples and things that our staff are working on in our Focus 1 group right now. Mandy and Adam also talked a little bit about the guaranteed viable curriculum piece, and that's been really instrumental at the middle level so far this year, not just at South, but at DeLong and North Star, as our staffs collaborated quite a bit together, from the principals to the instructional coaches to the teachers. The ELA team, the math team, and the social studies teams are really working collectively this year on that guaranteed and viable curriculum, which we haven't been able to do in a few years. So that's really been a powerful piece of when Lana and Colleen talk a little bit about how they then can work with the teachers specifically on those implementation and instructional strategies. Adam mentioned this too. We were kind of both doing separate presentations, and all of a sudden we realized we're talking about similar stuff. So, which is probably a good thing from a district standpoint. As you mentioned, Learning by Doing is a big book that the middle schools also looked at, and actually we used it when I was at Memorial as well, of looking at structures and putting structures in place at South and actually at DeLong and North Star as well, where we can really have focused time for our interdisciplinary teams and our same subject teams to really focus on academic and behavior data, and then how to improve our instructional strategies within those. So an interdisciplinary team would be a math, English, social studies, and science teacher on a grade level, and a group of students would be assigned to those students. And so you have 2 teams roughly at each school. At South, DeLong might have 2.5 teams, and North Star 1.5 teams. But so there's a tight structure of time that they get to meet a few times a week, where they can talk about their team interdisciplinary wise. And then the other days of the week, they get to meet the same subject. So the 2 math grade teachers, the 2 7th grade ELA teachers meet together, and they collaborate around structures. And that's where Lana and Colleen will talk a little bit later about what they do specifically to support those teachers. And so as we're going through Learning by Doing, the big piece of it is creating the time for staff in the school day to have these times to collaborate. And then also they talk about doing a lot of peer observations. A lot of times we don't get to see what our colleagues are doing. So we've been intentional this year at South of finding ways to observe your same subject partner. So we plan together a lot, but I don't really ever get to see you teach, and I teach the same. And then to see other people teach in an area. So we wanted to show a couple highlights of that as we've gone through. So at the beginning of the year, we will put together as much data as we can for our interdisciplinary teams. So for this is an example. In September, a team would get, now obviously we cut out the students' names, but they would be the students' names and whether in the star we use as our progress monitoring at the middle schools, because we give it in the fall, the winter, and the spring. We'll add the forward from the previous years, and then if they have any, if they have a special education, if they're an EL, and other services they may have, to really help the team understand what students they have on their team, and then how to really focus their instruction to meet the needs of all their students. And this is pretty common at all 3 middle schools, because I know the instructional coaches and the principals talk quite a bit. So the teams will collaborate around a lot of this with all of their instruction, at least 2 to 3 times a week. And really, then they even dig deeper into when they start giving their own common assessments. Let's say the 2 science teachers do, to come back to their teams and talk about how the kiddos did and other correlations between math and English or science, or is one kid just struggling in one class? So they spend a lot of time with that. When our forward exam scores do come out then in in November, then we add that piece of data in for the staff as well. And so again, we would give this to their team, so they don't have to go through all 800 students at South. They know the 100 to 150 students on their team and where they're at, how to really meet the needs of their students as they're, and so it's been a really powerful tool this year specifically for those teams to look at the struggling students. And it's been great to hear conversations. I go to almost all the team meetings. Lana and Colleen go to almost all the same subject meetings, and to hear the conversations around vocabulary and where our students are struggling, and where we can focus our instructional strategies on And I think when I talk to Michelle and Tim at the other two schools, I'll hear the same things, like their teams are really having the time this year, having not had the disruptions with COVID and things like that, to really be able to dig into helping our students. Another big piece that we've incorporated is our behavioral data. So the SEL piece of it, our counselors are able to come in once a week and meet with that interdisciplinary team and check in on students, which ones are struggling and where are the struggles at. So we use Swiss, the district uses Swiss as our data collection piece. And then that gives us all the data that the team would need in terms of where the behaviors are happening, how often, and then really to create supports around that child. Our counselors and our dean of students and teams have had a lot of parent meetings. This has been a real focus to try, and early intervention has been a huge piece to using all this data. So they're using a lot of data, but they're using it intentionally and they're using it structured now, where in the past it might not have been that easy because we didn't have that structured time. So these are some samples of things that they can do they will use on a regular basis to really hone in on almost every student in their on their team. And then it continues just to grow. I mentioned the peer observations, and when I first rolled it out this year, this is one thing I just wanted to learn from each other, and I didn't put a lot of expectations on it because I didn't want it to feel like it was another thing you had to do. And so I just said, we will create the time, and then staff just started emailing me. I just wanted to share some of the comments from them that this was not solicited. It was actually overwhelming to kind of see some of the comments when you can start to see, and you can read them for yourselves. I took out the teachers' names, obviously, but being able to observe people and to see what a FIAD teachers, how they assess compared to what's going on in math, or how they view their colleagues. So this has been a positive thing. And our goal with this is that they do this once a month. And I've talked to the staff, if you learn one thing each time you go in there, you're going to learn 6 or 7 new things by the end of the school year that you can then turn around and use in your classroom. And we've had staff share out, I learned this great icebreaker from this teacher, and I figured out how they get this activity going quicker, and their classroom management, I wondered how that worked in a tech ed class. So the conversations have been really good and powerful going into then taking it into their own classrooms. So that's been a real positive highlight. So then when we shifted it, another major piece, and Mandy mentioned this, was the coaches and the work with the coaches. All the middle school coaches get together, I think weekly or 3 times a month, and they share a lot of things, and from the AVID strategies that we're working on to classroom strategies, to how to use data, how to coach with data. So I wanted Lana and Colleen to give a chance to talk about the conversations they get to have, because we focus a lot on common language and consistency, because that's really been an integral part of how our students can learn and grow, especially through those interdisciplinary teams. If the math teacher is using the same language as the science teacher, which is the same language the social studies teacher is using, it becomes more ingrained to the students. It learns, it correlates with each other so much better. So I don't want to take a little bit of their thunder. So I want them to be able to kind of talk a little bit about what they get to do with the teachers, and you get to hear from them. So go ahead.
Thank you. So like he was saying, is that common language and consistency is hugely important. And like we heard before, we're really concentrating on that tier 1, that universal, and teachers are understanding for that universal, we have to have common language, and we have to focus on vocabulary and what we're doing in one class and another. So a couple examples we have up here is the nonfiction strategy of SQ4R, and that's the best way for students to understand, comprehend, and gain information when they're reading nonfiction text. So I met with all content areas and just said, anytime that you're reading, even if it's in FIAD to social studies class, use these strategies. Even the music teacher, it's like when you're reading music, you have to survey and preview what is it that you're going to read first, musically, so that students can get that background knowledge. What is it that I'm going to be reading? What is it I'm going to be learning? So every teacher has a big poster, so anytime that they're doing that, they can put it up and they see it in every single classroom. Same with the CER for writing, that came from the high school. So we're not just doing it in the middle schools, we're taking what the high school is doing and bringing that consistency down so that when they move on to the high school, in their English and science and social studies classes. They're hearing that same language, and it's going to be easier for them. I even had a FIAD teacher talking to me about this writing. So students already know how to do this, right? Yes, they already know how to do it. Here's your poster. It's right there on your wall. You know, grab it. They know how to do it. Here's where to find the scaffolds that you can use for students that need them. So every teacher has it so that every student hears the same language. You want to talk about math?
Yeah, and I'm trying to bring the math, and I do a lot with math and science, trying to bring the same vocabulary across those two curriculum too. And again, using the same thing that Lana had brought into all the other classrooms. And we talk about how they introduce graphs in science. Well, this is what math is doing. So they're trying to merge the vocabulary together. So kids see that it's going across everything that they're doing, and it's not a new thing every hour. So we're trying to bridge those gaps between.
Yeah, and a good example is the 8th grade. They're looking at vocabulary, and during their Falcon time, they'll have what are the assignments that you're doing, and then what is the key vocabulary for the week. And then like irrational was one of the words. So then when they were reading The Outsiders, they were talking about, well, how is this character acting irrationally? And how is this in science? How does irrational fit there? How does irrational fit in math? So just that common vocabulary across. So they're working really hard, talking to one another at teams and in same subject to how to do that, or you'll see the words throughout the hallway and how to use it in all content areas. And to continue with the vocabulary, we've had for the last 5 years or more, a set of 12 to 14 power words that we call, and those are verbs that you use, you'll see on standardized tests or any test like describe, analyze, that cite, compare, contrast, that every subject uses. And then we have them in every single classroom also, so that they have that visual of, you know, what does it mean to analyze? What does it mean to cite a source? But every teacher uses those power words. And then to even move that for their content specific for units, word walls are really big. We've talked about why do we need to know, you know, students get stuck because they don't have background knowledge, they don't have the vocabulary to understand what they're doing. So a lot of teachers are using, you know, for their SLOs or EEs, whatever it's called now, you know, they're using vocabulary as a measure of how am I moving students forward? Do they understand the vocabulary? And Carmen Koff, our ELL teacher, works really hard with all the content area teachers to how do you do a proper word wall that students are going to understand and be interactive with. Lesson planning, as the universal, you know, step one of having a universal, having a curriculum is you have to have a way to design your lessons. And we use the universal design for learning framework so that teachers, when they are writing their lessons, they're proactively planning for what barriers are my students going to have, and then what scaffolds am I going to put in place for these students so that they can be successful in the classroom. Because you heard that we don't have a lot of tier 2, tier 3 supports at, you know, that's what we're missing at South. So our teachers have to work really hard for that universal and that tier 1. And how do I meet the needs of all the students? And the two of us meet with new teachers and we collect their lesson plans and we look through them and we discuss them with them. And what are you missing, or what can you do differently? Or did you think of this? And it's worked really, really well. And some of them have used the design we've given them, or they use their own color coding system of really thinking about how do I meet the needs of my students. And it's helping them learn a lot along the way about what is it like to plan.
This is a sample of a first or second year teacher at South and their expectation to meet with them. And so I used one of the teachers' examples because they need to spend that time looking at all the students in their classroom and making sure that what barriers are in place, what multiple measures they need to use, whether the student needs something read to them as their assistive technology. And it's really been some great conversations, and they've really taken off with it too, which has been great to see. So as you know, we went through it pretty quick. There's a lot of really good things going on. So I'd encourage you to come out to South at any time. But we wanted to give a little bit of snapshot of kind of what's going on at South, but really it's a bigger snapshot of what's going on at the middle schools. Because like I said, Tim and Michelle and I talk pretty regularly. Instructional coaches speak weekly. And so a lot of the, you know, between our AVID strategies and our really structured around teams and that interdisciplinary teamwork, Vocabulary consistency has really been a real focus from our staff this year. So we wanted to make sure we got a chance to highlight it for you a little bit. So I think, Mandy, you have the last slide.
Yeah, I do. So just thinking back to, going back to this slide again, continue to come back to here. And hopefully tonight you saw how we, one of the strategies we are working on is to be aligned and coordinated in the work that we're doing. And year after year of us being aligned and coordinated, we hope we'll continue to move the needle even more. So with that, open it up for questions and bring you guys all up here, depending on what questions you have. We know we gave you a lot of information, but we had a lot to share.
Thank you so much for the presentation. At this time, I'll open the floor for comments and questions from board members or our student representatives. Commissioner Zerr?
This is a ton of work. I'm just going to acknowledge that what you guys are doing is, I mean, I can't imagine the lift that this must be. And that it is probably at times exhausting for the leadership, folks who are trying to, create all of this information and get it into the right folks' hands and empower teachers to really take it and run with it. And I think that sometimes, something I'm just curious about is how have you guys monitored, because I think probably what's really important to the success of this is how leadership is developing within buildings and within classrooms, even at the district level, and how, because, a good leader has the power to inspire a whole building of people to do things they never thought they could do before, right? And how is that work? I mean, because that's probably, as you guys are starting to have these bigger conversations, this bigger system work, there's probably people who are kind of like bubbling up to the top where you're like, hey, you guys get this, you're doing it. How are those folks being encouraged, supported, involved in the process? I guess I'm wondering about that, like leadership development and how you guys are leveraging those people who might be really getting this, are really good at it. How can we get them, more, I don't want to say power, but more leverage within their buildings, I guess, or even here at the district level?
I'll start us off. If you guys want to jump in. So one of the things in teaching and learning, we have a lot of work teams going on all times throughout the month. And so I think the people that you're talking about generally, because of those work teams, whether it's a curriculum writing team or we're pulling a group of teachers together to get input. So we've worked, and we know that we can't do this work ourselves, and our principals can't do this work themselves within their buildings. So we have to build capacity within our buildings. And we do that by having teacher teams or teachers be part of that work. So naturally, we have those leaders step forward to be part of the work when we put the invitations out there. Most oftentimes, the teachers that you're talking about become part of those groups, and then we continue to grow from there. And then I would say that is pretty consistent with what that looks like in a building of people stepping forward, being part of leadership teams and such. But
yeah, a few things that come to my mind is like, as I go to teams, there's no like team designee, but it's been fun to watch some that have taken that natural leadership, like, hey, I'll do that next week. I'll have it ready by Wednesday's meeting. Let's do this. What do you think about trying about that? So we've leveraged those folks to really kind of then, when we get together in all staff meetings or in larger group settings, highlight that and say, these guys, hey, Lana, when you were in team last Tuesday, talk about what you guys were talking about, because I think the other teams need to hear about it and see what that. So we'll leverage them. And then at South, for example, we have our leadership team meets twice a month on shorter time frames instead of having one big long meeting, and getting staff and some of those leaders to kind of help lead some professional development and to help kind of lead some of that stuff. So it's just, I think it's just starting to bubble, and it's starting to now use those folks to try to help encourage others to say, it's yes, you got a great idea. Let's run with it. Let's try it. And if it didn't work like we thought it was, let's try something different. And so that's been kind of fun to watch as teams are doing that within themselves right now.
Well, the only thing I would just add, just to kind of echo what was already shared, is at the elementary school level, we do have leadership teams, and I would deflect all of the credit at MANS to the staff there. And as a matter of fact, the presentation tonight regarding our instructional strategy with protocols was created by our team, by the staff. So we really have kind of grounded ourselves in shared leadership. So that's kind of the way we do business in our building, is no one person can do it at all alone. And so I feel pretty great that we have a pretty strong shared leadership team at MANS that helps drive a lot of the initiatives and the work that we're doing. So there's nice collective buy-in there too, and I think that helps tremendously. So
just, I mean, this is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, well, with the coaches, it's like we get to go to the same subject, so that we were able to see and hear what they all have to say, and they appreciate that so much. And the work that Michelle and Amanda do with us helps a lot. They want to hear all voices. It's not just the department chair that gets to come to curriculum writing, it's any of the staff for that curriculum. And so they really appreciate their voices being heard at all times. So then they can step up into a role that they might not have had before. So just them being able to talk and us hearing them and, affirming what you're doing is, yep, that is what, and then they're just like, whew. I mean, I've had so many teachers, whew, I was so worried I wasn't doing what was right. So just being allowed to have their voices heard has been really important, especially during that curriculum writing time.
But just, maybe this is more for Mike, just as a follow-up to that, and just in thinking about this, as we do this really big work, there's so many moving parts here, and there's so much expertise that I could imagine is required to do this and do this well. And it sounds like we're leveraging the passion and the expertise of the folks that we have in our buildings. And I would be really excited as we're, I know that we're always recruiting, we're always hiring, there's always openings in our district. We're a big district. We have a lot of those, of just, how, my curiosity is, how are we kind of like wrapping that around in our recruitment to get folks in who experience in systems like this, like who have moved the needle or have done big things like this before in other districts, that can come in and help be those passionate leaders or help bring new ideas into the room. I think that's just something that, it seems just like a big lift, and the more really smart and capable people we can get in the room.
I think part of that is how the principals hire. One thing is I've noticed, and I was not very good at this last year, was the year before, I think the principals would agree, I was not present in a lot of the principals meetings. So the good ideas that they're sharing here, where they're moving the needle on certain things, like they get excited when they see, oh, our star data, went from here to here in December. We got to celebrate that. Most of the staff members that we're hiring, they're fairly new, but I know the principals, when they discuss these in September, October, November, they're probably getting in the hiring season. The questions they ask, what Mr. Keaton had brought up about, there are things about equity that they ask, culturally responsive teaching methods, and learning, and what are their experiences with that. Sometimes you may have a veteran teacher that doesn't know much about the achievement gap in a different district. But I think because of our commitment here, that's one thing that they'll illustrate, whether it's a question or they'll look for things in a candidate's resume. But I think that part about sharing in the principals meetings that I've been a part of, especially this year, there is that opportunity for it's a heavy lift, and that's why they're working together on these things. They have to, because one person can't do it all.
And I would say even with our new staff, like the example of the lesson planning, which I took from Michelle, I know she's here, is most of our newer teachers have come through COVID, and it was so we had some second year teachers do the lesson planning this year, and the one was like, and the first month, tell me if I'm wrong, Kelly knows what I'm talking about.
You did.
I come in every Monday now, I'm not stressed anymore. I got the whole week planned out. I know exactly what I'm doing. His stress level went way down and he's having so much more enjoyment in the classroom because he was able to do that and figure that out. And so those are the wins that have been fun to see.
Like our math department itself is very new, like all first or second year teachers. We've got like 4 or 5 of them. And the work that they're doing together and the lesson planning that we're having doing them before the week is, before it's time to teach it and thinking about those barriers and coming together on their data. They're just doing a phenomenal job. And one time we were meeting and they were like, this is just like a collaboration project in college. I love this. And they're just like at it. They're in the data. They're working hard. So it's exciting to see that they're excited and hopefully that will help move the needle a little bit too.
To thank Colleen and Trevor, and I know the principals have supported this. Last summer, that department she's talking about, the newbies, so to speak, they were in the summer. And that's where you move the needle, is that collaboration, the collective efficacy, where Hattie says it's 1.57, the effect size. That's what it is. And we have not been able to do that, a little bit prior to COVID, but because of COVID too. And that's where this building is very, very busy, and it should be in the summer. And that's where we have to do it, because teaching is too exhausting from September to May. It really is, even though the department and these teams of teachers do really some very good things. But I really appreciate the way they're looking at data, what they had shown, and they do that in their principals meetings as well and in their schools.
Commissioner Lyons.
I was, thank you for the presentation. Appreciate all that you do. The math protocols, is that something that is specifically being taught just at MANS right now? Or is that something that's
Not necessarily. I know there are a few other buildings in the district at the elementary level that are engaging in some of this work. There are a few math coaches at the elementary level that are having some conversation about these protocols. So while I can't say specifically which buildings beyond the walls of MANS that are, I do know that there's conversation being had amongst the coaches as it being a pretty impactful engagement strategy for students in our district. So, so yes, but not broadly, I would say. It's not a district implemented strategy as of right now.
so since that's isolated, can we take a look at the STARS data that's going on at MANS and compare it to other middle schools that aren't using the protocols?
Well, perhaps, and one thing I would share, at least at the elementary level, is something that is universally implemented in math, is that math talk. So if you dig into our curricular resource, math expressions, it's a big rock within the instructional strategies related to math instruction. We're just taking that concept of math talk and framing it around some dialogue and framing it around some different ways that students can have that math conversation. So I should preface my answer by saying, yes, math talk and math engagement is a district-wide practice and strategy. We are just taking that and examining it a little further. So, and time will tell. Certainly time will tell. We're excited about the engagement. You walk into a classroom where math is occurring and students are having great conversation and great dialogue, and the teacher's very busy interacting with students, but not necessarily driving instruction. That happens in the front matter. The students get to take that and engage with one another, which is fun when you're 9. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I think one thing that I would add to that, Commissioner Lyons, is that the collaboration structures that we're trying to put in place will allow for us to look at data and to say, if we were looking at, let's just use MANS for example, and noticing that their data was really being impacted by something, you would have conversations with MANS and say, what's happening? What are you doing?
Right.
Even through the instructional coach meetings, when they come together on a weekly basis, they're having dialogue about some of the things that they're trying. But that's why it's important for us at the district level to be looking at data to look for those things. But the key piece to that is seeing that high level be sustained. So that's what we will look for over time when something is trending upward and it's sustaining. Then, okay, let's really dig into whatever it is and to understand what that is and can we pinpoint it to something? And then if we can, to replicate that in our other buildings.
And I would just add that a lot of the protocols that they're using at MANS are continuing throughout the middle school curriculum. And that's what we're ultimately trying to have happen there, where students are the ones that are doing the learning. I mean, they're learning. We're not teaching it to them. They're trying to figure it out. It's much more problem solving based and trying to talk out what they're doing. So it's a lot of the same protocols that they talked about from MANS.
Dr. Farrar.
Thank you so much for these presentations. And I want to comment on how important this kind of collaboration is among educators in terms of reaching our students. So I just want to thank you for the work you're doing. I wanted to bring up that the fact that underrepresented groups need to grow at a faster rate. And I wanted to connect that back to the work you're doing in culturally responsive teaching. Since we know that sometimes when we teach towards our most marginalized and minoritized students, that in fact, doing that lifts everybody up in really effective ways. So I'm really pleased to know that you're reading culturally responsive teaching in the brain together as colleagues and are using that material. And I would just suggest another framework that goes along with that, which is trauma-informed and equity-centered teaching. I read a great book on this recently, and it aligns well with the same kinds of principles, and especially I think in the moment that we are living in right now in the, I guess, I don't know if we're in the post-pandemic yet or not, but we're in a do phase for sure, that some of the challenges our students are encountering right now do come from trauma that they've experienced over the last couple of years. And so that might be an additional framework that may be of service. So thank you all.
Commissioner Zerk.
So one other question. So I guess as I'm really excited to see the tier 2, tier 3 develop, because I think, one thing that I wouldn't use the word concerned, but I can't think of a better word. Mindful of maybe in our district is when we talk about our, some of the challenges we have with representation and special education. And I really think that there's a potential for those tier 2 and tier 3, supports to capture some students in differentiation that perhaps otherwise right now are being referred to special education for a lack of ability to support them in the classroom. And I have a strong concern about that. And I think that development is really important, and that differentiation is really going to be key to that. So I'm really excited to see how that develops, and just the importance of that work. What we do there really could have a big impact on our students who need it the most. But the piece of it that for me that I feel like I wouldn't quite sleep well if I didn't ask it is, how are we saw a lot tonight about how we're sort of looking at students who are falling behind, but how are we, because there's like two ends to that tier 2, tier 3 spectrum, right? There's the kids who are falling behind and there's the kids who are accelerating. That's a big gap. That can be a big spread in the classroom. You can have kids way over here, you 2 grades behind, you can have kids 2 grades in front. So how are we, I think the stretch backward, I can see where we're headed with that. Talk to me about what we're doing to meet those kids who are accelerating right now, in an aggressive fashion, especially considering, some of the moves that we've taken to make sure that all those kids are together in a classroom to, extend learning to that level. Everyone gets to that level. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. I'm glad you brought that up. The way that our framework is put together, when we say tier 2 and tier 3 supports, we oftentimes think of our students that are not meeting benchmark, but that also means our students that are excelling well and beyond our benchmarks as well. So we also want to have supports in place for those students that need something more and different, whether that means additional supports to support them because they're not meeting benchmark, but it also means something more and different beyond the universal or level that they're at. So we have gone through some extensive changes the last few years, even through COVID or right before COVID. At our high school level, we naturally have courses that meet the needs of those students that are at that level. Where we're focusing our time right now is definitely at the middle school and making sure that we're meeting their needs and really digging into what that looks like at the elementary as well. And we have been implementing an assessment that helps us, and this is new to us, is the COGAT in the elementary, to give that assessment and then use the results of that assessment to understand which learners that is. Oftentimes our teachers already know who they are, but sometimes not. And then the same type of plan goes into place. So if you think back to that tier 2, tier 3 slide, establishing those data rules and the processes that need to go in place to ensure that students receive those additional supports. That same process needs to be developed, more fully developed, so that we can better support those students that need those additional challenges and how we can better meet those needs as well. And at the middle school, we're doing a lot of work with that. And I don't know if the two of you want to add a little bit to the work that we're doing with Michelle Radke and her office as well.
Can talk about that just a little bit. So things have changed a little bit, as Mandy said, in the past few years. So we're really trying to figure out kind of our new process or what it actually looks like. We kind of got the math rolling. We still have a course that's offered if kids are accelerated. Again, we're looking at COGATs, we're looking at STAR scores, we're looking at forward scores to make sure that kids are appropriately placed and challenged. But in the other areas, as we're building and we're talking about all their curriculum stuff that's coming up, we're hoping that as they develop their new unit plans, that part of that is the extension. Like, what are we going to do? So back to those 4 questions that we brought up from Mans, what are we going to do if they already know it? That should be built right into our unit plan. So as we're moving forward, we're trying to make sure that that is part of the language for everybody, not just a few teachers, so that we're bringing it in the classroom and that we're ready again before we teach it. We're ready if we have kids that need more and different. So it's definitely a work in progress, but we're working pretty hard to try to identify what needs to be done to get that done.
I'll close this out. Mandy, I appreciated a lot of the things that you brought up tonight, because one of the things that the board has been talking about over the past couple of years as we transitioned our governance is setting goals and really attacking those and saying, yeah, we hit them or we don't, but we have them. This is what we're driving towards. And you brought those up tonight, especially on growth and the need for a specific goal for how do we get at our gaps that we're facing. And as Dr. Ferrari brought up, oftentimes when we attack those, or not attack is the wrong word, it's too violent. When we work with those kids and we support them, right? When that we're going to bring everyone along with them. So I was really glad to hear that that's part of the discussion. I'm sure that you've heard Dr. Beekett say many, many times that the cross tabulations and examining multiple variables is very important. So I was, also buoyed tonight. I agree with her that is important. So I'm glad to hear that that's working. I actually would like to see more specifically, like what do those look like for our actual data, and what are the specifics around, what we're doing, to really get at those targets. How are we going to lift everyone by helping out those who have not been served well, but also, require the most help, and maybe that does go across both spectrum. So I really appreciate the forward looking tonight, and I want to hear more, and I want to hear more specifics and really dig into those as we go through more of these results. So thank you all for the work that you're doing. I'm going to take this time in a public meeting to thank Colleen Morgan, especially because this is more personal than it is professional, but she did a lot of work with my kids as they went through South, and they are much improved for her work. So thank you very much, Mrs. Morgan. But thank you all for being here tonight. At this time, we're going to move on to our board development segment. We are running a little later than we had planned, but we can take the time that we have. We, at our last meeting, of course, talked about some different policy options and had some discussions around, some things that we might be interested in, and to make sure that we had another chance to come back tonight to have more discussion on them. I'm not sure we have any proposed policy. You'll see it's set up under a kind of a work session sort of format. If you'll remember last time, and it looks like Lacey has put it on the screen here, some of the things that came up last time were, potentially talking about how we define reasonable within our board superintendent relations policies. The definition of innovative in OE5, especially in 5.7. Possibly, there was discussion around potentially how to request agenda items, and then consideration for ways to be responsive to issues. I don't have a firm agenda. This is how we're going to get at these. I wanted us to have a chance to have a little bit more conversation around some of these things. I had a chance just to chat with Dr. Farrar in the couple of minutes before we started about some of the reading that she was doing around reasonable. But I think what I'd like to do is just sort of open the floor, and if we want to discuss any of these, maybe my goal for tonight is to, if there's something that the board feels like we want to potentially write as a policy, find someone who would take a swing at bringing forward some proposed language for a work session. But I guess, if nothing else, we'll cap it at a half hour again tonight. That'll put us at 5 minutes to 9. I know we still have a couple of agenda items after that, and then, if we don't use all the time, that's fine too. So at this time, I guess I would just open it to anybody who wants to jump in and bring up sort of your thoughts as you've reflected over the past couple of weeks. Commissioner Clements.
Thank you. So I did some research over the weekend, was doing some readings from various places on these questions. How do we define these terms? Again, as we talked about on side conversation before the meeting started, reasonable is a very common term that's used in management literature and legal literature. This is a kind of an amalgamation of a few of those that place to start. That reasonable is a form of judgment by a logical process following established values, standards, and procedure. A defensible judgment formed by clearly articulated rationale consistent with district policy. So the body still might disagree with the outcome for political or other terms, but it puts it out there that a reasonable decision or a reasonable judgment is clearly tied to what we've established are those values or standards or procedures. And it would be we'd find something unreasonable as if there was some decision which was clearly not anchored in those things, regardless of whether we agree with it or not. I think we have to also consider how we would consider something reasonable versus unreasonable, where there's some ambiguity about how a decision lies within potentially conflicting values or potentially aspects of our procedure where there isn't a clear direction. But I think the purpose of coming up with a definition is just to help us and future board members wrestle with that question. What is reasonable versus unreasonable, and what are things we just don't agree with, even if they can be clearly articulated within our procedure.
I mean, that's certainly the discussion in the coherent governance literature about what does reasonable mean, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the superintendent makes every decision that the board agrees with, that this is the best way to approach this thing, but that it's within, as you said, I think that is the heart of, that it's within the values expressed by the board in the operational expectations and in the results policies. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that if the board chooses to exercise their right to intervene and change a decision or influence the superintendent to change their decision, it doesn't mean that they arrived at an unreasonable decision. I think we have to make sure there's two clearly different things. So a superintendent could arrive at what the board thinks is reasonable, but we just don't agree with it. And I think that's different for when we think something's just not reasonable. I think that we would evaluate that decision differently.
Right, the board's obligation is if it's reasonable to support the superintendent's decision, and if one does not agree with it.
I think that this probably all could have been less of a challenge for our body if there was some clearly articulated. I don't think that the process for how we actually managed, so it was very possible in this sense that a majority, it's very possible, we never voted, but it's very possible that a majority of us felt that the decision, the foreign language study, the result of the foreign language study was unreasonable, right? It's very possible, but we got caught up in the definition of that word. And so if the definition of that word is that something is unreasonable if it violates board policy, then the board should be able to, by majority vote, deem it that way. But I think that we could never get to a place of actually calling that vote because we actually don't have a clear articulation of what that means. So without something written down, and it would still have to clear a majority vote of this body to deem it out of line with the policy. So I think that, we don't just want people calling willy-nilly. I want to call that unreasonable, right? Like we don't need to be calling for votes here and there and everywhere. There should be a clear process articulated by which we do that. Whether that is you call for an agenda item, so then it's noticed, we discuss it, then we determine, are we going to vote on it? And then, the next meeting we vote on it. But there has to be a clearly articulated and laid out process by which this body can execute a check on its policy. I think that just has to be something that's codified and written down step by step. Because we're a smart group that got to know this policy very deeply because we wrote it. Future boards might not.
To be fair, we copied it.
Well,
Right.
right.
So my only question, and I am not weighing in on whether or not I think that it's the right direction to go to codify it or to not codify it. I will say that no other of our example districts, the ones that we use here in Wisconsin or the two that we use, Aspen and Colorado.
Leaders.
That's the case, but I wonder why none of them who have been doing it longer than we have done that. And so that was certainly a thought point that we went through. And I'm not weighing whether or not we should. I'm just saying one of the thought points, we at one point had a draft with the like reasonable person standard, like pseudo legal definition written into it. We ended up taking it out before we approved it because as we looked at any of the other ones, we looked at the model policies from Coherent governance. We looked at examples from array of districts that there wasn't defined there. And I think at that time we felt like there's a reason for that. Because that doesn't mean we can't do it, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it necessarily. I'm just bringing up that more experienced districts who have certainly gone through difficult decisions. In this Fairfax County, Virginia, they're going through difficult decisions all the time right now over the past few years. They haven't chosen to go that way. So I think there's something to consider and weigh as we think about it. Again.
But there are also a lot of districts that don't have equity policy, that don't have, we have chosen to make this policy work for our district and our goals and our results for our kids. And they don't have, we have a result policy that not a lot of other districts have. So I think that it is not, the precedent, sure. But I think that it gives our community a mechanism by which they can speak through us if they feel like something that has happened has violated their trust and their understanding of what we're here to protect on their behalf. And I don't think they should be stuck in limbo with us arguing about even how to talk about it. I think there should be a very clear process by which we talk about it. And so that the community understands It's black and white, and it's not, so that a board 7 years from now, who is not made up of any of us, understands very clearly how to do this. We've learned the lesson, we've had the struggle, here's what we learned. Like, I think that that's what we owe the future community that will be in this room and the future boards that will be in this room.
So I think I'm going to speculate momentarily for just a second here. This is made up and isn't what happened. But had the district not reversed course on that decision, we had put something on the agenda and we were prepared. And I think that we had a majority vote to address it at the next meeting. And so, although in the initial moment when that news arrived, you're right that we didn't know what to do. But I also think that we responded rather quickly in terms of discussing it through the opportunity of the R2 data. And I think that in agenda setting, we found a reasonable path to putting it on the agenda in a way that was actionable. So I'm not saying that this was a perfect execution or what we would like to happen in the future. But I don't think that we were powerless, and I don't think that we were helpless, even if we momentarily felt that to be the case. That doesn't mean I don't think that there's value and forward thinking in codifying a process for exactly this type of scenario in the future. One way that we might do that would be to say that one potential category for deeming something unreasonable would be that it's found to be in violation of policy already existing. I think if we did that we would want to be careful not to frame it as though that's the only possibility. And that we might want to anticipate that there might be a scenario that I can't come up with in a thought experiment at this particular moment, but there might be a scenario in which a decision didn't clearly violate policy, but which we would still nevertheless decide or determine as a body was unreasonable. Do I imagine what that is right now? No, I don't. But I think that we're all people that know there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and I like to be flexible. I do think that in this particular scenario that we were dealing with, that it was clear to a majority of members of the board that this didn't align with, on the one hand, values established by the equity statement, which is not a policy, but is a guiding values document. And on the other hand, seemed to me, at least, to violate a number of OE policies in my reading of those things. So I think that we absolutely could, and I would volunteer to draft a version of a process for when the board might want to intervene because we found a decision to be unreasonable, and what that might look like. Do I think we absolutely must adopt that? I don't know, but I would give a try at writing something, and I would be happy to submit that to the board, and we could further discuss what we all collectively think would be operational language that we could implement and use, and which, as you point out, future people sitting in these seats might be able to use without a lot of difficulty understanding the meaning and the steps.
Just to say, I agree with both commissioners, or Commissioner Farr on your points, but I think it is valuable to have a procedure, even if it is flexible and, you know, maybe not perfect right out of the box, but it serves as a guide. So when we had this situation where we frankly didn't know what to do, and I think we figured it out, we muddled through, but let's create a structure so we don't have to do that. And inevitably, there may be a situation where we're still befuddled in terms of how exactly we're going to do this. But as someone who for a lot of my job is conducting ministerial work, interpreting policies and procedures and laws and ordinances, et cetera, there still has to be some mechanism by which there's a review that happens where somebody disagrees and can, you know, change that decision. So I don't think it needs to be, you know, overly specific. I don't think it needs to be cumbersome. I just think you need to have a guide. And at the very least, it would describe how what we determine define as reasonable and what's the board's process. And it would probably mirror the process for getting
Things on the agenda.
Yeah, something on the agenda. And there may be things that follow that process that come to a board discussion or come to a board vote. And then after the discussion, we say, oh, okay, well, we see the point. It maybe was reasonable. We didn't see every side of it. But I think it would provide that avenue, and it would at least reduce the confusion, if not some of the emotions that were involved with our initial response.
So I found the decision reasonable, but I didn't agree with it. I understand that we are the only school in the state that has a Japanese program. There's a reason for that. There's a concern that when faculty leave, that there's a sustainability issue for that program, which I think we need to, as a board, think through in the future. There are real enrollment problems that are more so in the Hmong program than the Japanese, but they're still there, and they're in the German, and they're in the French. I really support the foreign language program because I think it's a very important program for the future of our kids in this district. But I did not find the decision to look at these programs through a lens and determine whether or not they were sustainable as an unreasonable decision. I just didn't agree with it. So at the end of the day, as a board member, I want to be able to have the ability to express myself when I think decisions that are brought to this body are going in a direction that I don't think is the right direction. And I don't think it has anything to do with it being reasonable or unreasonable. We're trying to shoehorn that foot into a policy document. So when as a board member, I see something and I think I want to have an opinion on this, but then I can't get it on the agenda because it only goes through agenda setting. So we got rid of all committees. And why did we get rid of all committees? We got rid of all committees so all board members could be a part of the conversation in policy and in finance. But the only place that now is making decisions is the agenda setting. So I think that one of the issues that we need to talk about is if two board members see something and would like to have it on the agenda, that we have that opportunity to do that. Because I don't know if you can, within policy, by words of unreasonable or reasonable or innovative, or be able to take care of these scenarios which will always change. And reasonable, normally you're going to see it as reasonable if you agree with it. And normally you're going to see it as unreasonable if you don't agree with it. But in this case, I found it that the decision was reasonable. I just didn't agree with where the direction was going.
Thank you, Commissioner Lyons. I think those are related but different issues. I think, one being just how do we get something on the agenda? And then the other being what do we do when we think something's not reasonable? I think those might be different reasons for how something comes up to being a agenda item. The ultimate rationale being we want to talk about something. And one might be because we want to discuss whether it's reasonable or not. And the other might be whether we just feel like we don't agree for whatever reason. Within coherent governance, I think it's a little squishy about how we deal with that, but I think as we formed this governance model, we assured ourselves that we would still be able to take action on things if we felt compelled to do so. We weren't completely just giving up our ability to do that. We were just agreeing how we were going to delegate most operational things.
So how do you pick and choose? That's the question.
I don't have an answer for that.
I think, the thing that attracted me to coherent governance, probably the only thing, was that we were going to spend more time talking about kids. And right now we're talking about ourselves and about how we govern. And it's annoying and I want it to be done so that we can go back to talking about kids. But I think that we need to have a system by which we check things. I think that perhaps the biggest hurdle right now is the process of getting something on an agenda. I don't agree that 2 board members should be able, I think that there should be a bar to clear. I think that I don't want somebody just at the end of a meeting being able to say, President Nordine, I want this on an agenda. And it's just one person can say anything that they want and whatever bone they've got shoved up their sleeve that day. That should not be the by which it should be something that we deem important enough to our kids that we need to have a deep conversation about it. So I think that having a process by which we formally request agenda items and that those things then go to the agenda setting meeting so that, because there very well could be in the future a vice president and some random third member who agree on, I'm just going to use getting rid of snow days, right? Like, we're not going to do snow days anymore. It's all virtual learning. We've been here, right? But like they're going to discuss that. And even though now there's these 2 people in agenda setting who agree on something, well, that's a majority of the people in the agenda setting room. So then what happens? That's not a sustainable way for this board to govern. If the board has agreed that that's not something we're going to talk about because it's just not, it's a decision that's favorable, we're not going there, there's no reason. So if there's something that this board needs to discuss that is outside of the scope of what we normally discuss, there should be a process by which we request an agenda item. Because that was the way that got on the agenda, it went very well. Worked very well this time. You guys did it. It got on the agenda. It was perfect. But that could very well have not happened if the person sitting in your chair didn't agree with it. So I think,
but
I think that there's
the only one in agenda setting.
Right, but it could have not worked that way because there's a minority of the board in that room. So I just want to say that I think there needs to be a voted on mechanism by which a majority of the board determines what we discuss, if it's outside of the normal scope of our calendar.
Very well.
So, finally, do we still have a referral process at the end of our board meetings?
Our policy is, you want something on the agenda, let the president know. President will take it to agenda setting, and it will get discussed. If you put on the agenda the agenda.
So I'm just wondering in a manner to quorum issues is I'm not gonna email, I can't email everyone and say, I want to talk about this. What do you think? Like, that's a no. So how do we make sure, because if I just email or call the president, Commissioner Nordine, and say, I think I want to talk about this, Tim could say, maybe not. No one else
You should
knows.
get rid
that's-
of me as the president
Well-
at that point. Like, I shouldn't be the president if I'm unwilling to fulfill the duties that are described in the policies about the president. I think, I'm going to say that I think in general, I thank you, Dr. Farrar, for volunteering to write a description and potentially a procedure so that we can look at it. I think the problem is less that we don't have those things in place, because when we needed them in place, it worked exactly as it was supposed to. They're all in here. And I think our collective issue is not understanding what we have written as our own policies. All of these things that we're talking about are already described, right? And they're already there in broad strokes. The board can adjust its policies at any time. The board can decide the bar for what we talk about is it reasonable? It is not operations. If you don't like an operational decision and you want to voice that, voice it during the appropriate monitoring report, or send the superintendent an email and let him know. But we shouldn't be bringing them forward. And I think, I do believe that everything that we need is currently right here. That doesn't mean it can't be made better. So I look forward to seeing what you bring forward, because I think you make some excellent points about how it might be helpful to bring forward for future people and make things easier. I think our real problem is that we don't collectively know very well what is in what we're actually supposed to do when these things arise. Like, understanding what is in there and knowing the policy better, having our own board developed in what we have written is more valuable than micromanaging. But again, I get the sense that I look forward to seeing what comes forward. I think everything could be made better. But my initial take is what we need to do is understand what's in here more. And if you think that, you know, having it, I mean, I don't know how we will agenda set without having an open meeting if you want to have a majority of the board. And if you do not trust the president to take your agenda item to the group that's in agenda setting, which rotates through, then that person shouldn't be the president.
The problem is not that we don't trust. The problem is we don't have a mechanism to get and that we should, because no board member should be able to just willy-nilly, like, if Josh wants to all of a sudden talk about the official colors of the Eau Claire School District.
That's why agenda setting talks about it and decides is.
If you agree with him. But this is the thing, is like, we can't wait a whole year to get rid of you. There needs to be a mechanism.
I can resign now if that's what you're asking me to do.
There needs to be a mechanism by which this body in reasonable and in a majority, like, let's just say that the board was not in agreement over masks, but that the three people who were in agenda setting were in favor of there being no masks. And then all of a sudden I'm saying I want to talk about masks and you're saying no. And that we went through that because we were all together. We're in a situation now where perhaps some of us weren't on the same page and we didn't agree. And that creates in our body a tension. And I think the smartest thing we could do is give ourselves and future boards a way that democracy rules. And if there is something outside of the normal scope of what is happening in agenda setting, so outside of the set agendas of what is going to go in focus on results and the normal monitoring cycle, if there's something that is exceptional, all that should be done is at the end of a board meeting, Josh gets to say, I want to talk about the school colors, and all of us get to vote no, and he gets to vote yes, and then it doesn't go to agenda setting. And it's painless. It is the board speaking as a body, it guides you or whoever is sitting there. With all due respect, President Reen, you have a doctor in educational policy. That is a very rare thing that we're going to have sitting in this room. And as I have an early childhood education degree. So for me, those policies are confusing. It took me a whole week of chatting with people to even try to figure out, make sense of what I thought about what was in that book. So I really disagree with you that it's all there and it's all super easy, because for me, it wasn't easy. And I don't feel like for this body, it was easy. So I think that we should have a very easy way by which we, and something that honestly protects the administration from board members just saying, hey, man, I want to talk about snow days. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about that. And maybe they have a friend who sits in the president's seat. It needs to be, and it needs to be well thought out, and it needs to be by majority vote so that there are always or more people saying, yeah, that's something worth talking about.
I'm not sure that something should have to clear a bar of 4 people to talk about it. That may be. This isn't like the hill I'm going to die on today, but I am not sure that that is the right bar to clear to get something on an agenda. Because that already implies perhaps not, but perhaps it implies already a majority vote on the issue itself. And I'm not sure that something should have to already arrive to that level of agreement to get discussed. But these are really good questions, and they're really important considerations in how we want to proceed and what types of policy we might try to craft. And I think that we are all interested in making this a clearer process. I think that we all approach this work with goodwill and with the best interest of students at the forefront of all decisions we make. I think that the level of confusion that a number of people felt in how to respond to this indicates that it may not be a binary. Either it's all there and we just have to study it better, or we need to change it. It may be a combination of both. Maybe we do need more board development on understanding our policies and using them effectively. I don't doubt it. On the other hand, the notion that a clear process for contesting a decision made by the administration that we find unreasonable, either because it violates policy or because we find it unreasonable for another compelling reason connected to values, for instance, the equity statement. I think these are worth trying. I think it's worth trying to do. And I realize we're now at the end of the time.
You're gonna, well,
Okay.
I appreciate that. So thank you. So I look forward to when you have that draft ready to come to like the policy work session, we'll put that in and we'll get that scheduled to move on. If Commissioner Zur, you'd like to write something along the lines of a proposal for, policy regarding agenda items, I welcome that as well. So at this time, let's move on because we do have 2 more items yet to, this does not put any of these topics necessarily to bed. We didn't even touch on at least 2 of them. So we'll keep those on our list of policy concerns. But we will go on. We have a facilities naming committee recommendations development section. So I will turn it over to Kim, who's been waiting patiently. Thank you, Kim.
Is the PowerPoint. Oh, thank you. I got it. Good evening. I'm here today on behalf of the Facility Naming Committee, who has recently considered 3 proposals from the community regarding the naming of facilities or parts of facilities in the Eau Claire Area School District. So this process is actually guided by Policy 940, and the committee was really committed to being tight to the policy. So I'll start today by talking about the policy, and then I will end today also by talking about the policy. You can see policy 940 here, and specifically the 2 circumstances that shall generally authorize a naming privilege. This is a board decision. So the committee is coming to you tonight with a recommendation, but the board is ultimately the decision maker in this situation. Policy 940 does have a rule, which you can see here throughout the presentation tonight. I will refer to the rules so that you can see how the process that the committee used is aligned to Rule 940. So we'll start with the committee members. In Rule 940, it does say under number 3 that the committee will consist of 6 people, 1 board member, 1 district administrator, 4 members of the public with possible connections to PTA or PTO district-wide, business and chamber, government connections such as city or county, and then historical connections such as the museum or the university. And then you can see on the right-hand side, the committee members that we had this year, which were Commissioner Lyons from the school board, Mike Johnson and myself. Jamie Kampf is a member of our Family Advisory Council and is an Eau Claire Area School District family. Mark Fanis was our business or chamber representative. Terry Weld was a representative from the Eau Claire City Council, and Charles Vu, a representative from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. The committee followed the process that you see outlined here with the agenda items in the box below each colored box. So in July and again in October, we were approached by the community for 3 proposals for board consideration related to facility naming either part or all of a facility. On November 3rd, the committee convened, and at that time, the first thing that we did was examine the policy and rule related to the requirements for the questions that the community came forward with. And then we developed methods in alignment, and I'll show you that in a little bit, in alignment with the rule. How are we going to gather feedback from the schools involved, from the district, and from the community? A survey, community survey was deployed around November 15th. It was open for, I believe, either 7 or 8 days. Our goal was to have it be open at least for 1 week. And we targeted the impacted schools, the community at large. And we did that either with direct mail, through newsletters, or social media networking. And then the committee reconvened on November 29th for examination of the community feedback, and then identifying additional information that would be needed in addition to that community feedback. Between then and December 9th, the additional feedback was gathered, and the committee met again on December 9th for the recommendations with naming and consideration of the policy moving forward. So within the guidelines, on this slide, I only have number 5 in blue, but as I was reviewing this tonight, I probably should have number 4 also in blue and bold. Number 4 says input would be sought from the specific geographical areas of the school as well as the district at large. And then number 5 says that the guidelines for the committee are to consider naming schools for locally significant individuals, events, or locations. Could be parts of facilities, athletic fields, could also be named. Students could research historical information or local significance, and they should reflect a balance in gender. So one of the first things we did as a committee is we talked about those guidelines specifically in number 5. The one that we talked about probably the most at length was 5D. Facility names should reflect a balance in gender, and we discussed this in relation to the equity statement from the board. And what the committee said is or determined was, this is the policy that we have in front of us. So we have to follow the policy in front of us. And at the end of following this policy in front of us, then the committee would like to recommend perhaps expanding 5D to say it should be in line with the equity commitment of the board. But the policy that we have in front of us right now is balance and gender. So that was the avenue that we used to gather information. So what you see then over on the right-hand side is results from the survey that was sent out. And for each of the community proposals, a couple of questions were asked. So here you can see for proposal number 1, which is to rename this facility the Marvin G. Lansing Administrative Building. There were 74% of the respondents were not familiar with Marv Lansing. 11 said they were familiar with him in some way, but not in any way listed here. And then you can see the balance were either students, employees, or colleagues of Marv Lansing. And of the people that responded, 89% said that the recommendation for this building to be named the Marvin G. Lansing Administrative Building is aligned with the policy 940 and rule 940. The second recommendation or proposal that came to the committee was to rename the main entrance at North High School the John Bowman entrance. So again, you can see here that 75% of the people that responded were not familiar with John Bowman. 13% knew him in some way that wasn't listed in the question, and the balance either knew him as a student, as an employee, or as a colleague. And of those respondents, 87% said the recommendation to name the main entrance at North High School aligned with policy 940 and rule 940. And then the last proposal from the community is to name the athletic fields at both North and Memorial inside the track after Connie and Pat Ulrich, who were both teachers. Connie was a teacher at Memorial High School. Her sister Pat was a teacher in the state, but not in the Eau Claire Area School District. So we asked the same questions. Please indicate if you're familiar with Connie and Pat Ulrich. Here, 83% of the people were not familiar with them. 11% said they were familiar, but not in a way listed on the survey. And then the balance were either students or colleagues of one of those sisters. And then does this recommendation to rename the fields within the tracks at North and Memorial High Schools align with policy 940 and rule 940? 87% of the respondents indicated that it did. And the survey asked, final question, do these 3 community recommendations meet the established criteria within policy and rule 940? And this was specific to gender balance. 80% of the respondents said it did. And here you can see the primary, there was an open-ended question on the survey. So you can see the primary themes within that open-ended response. The most frequent themes were support for the 3 recommendations from Marvin Lansing Administrative Building, John Bowman Entrance, and Connie and Pat Ulrich Fields. There were comments about wondering why the district would be considering this, and is this what you should be concentrating on at this point in time? Or facilities shouldn't be named after people. There was also some concern about if both North and Memorial had a field called the Ulrich Field. If you were from out of town, how would you know which one to go to? So these were all things that the committee pondered. So after those survey results, the committee asked for the Human Resources Department to look at the employment files of each of the people within the recommendation to see if there were any red flags. There were no red flags reported by the Human Resources Department. And they also sought clarification about that. If 2 fields were named the same thing, what could we do about that? And so with that information, then on December 9th, the committee determined that their recommendation to the board would be to rename 500 Main Street, this building, the Marvin G. Lansing Administration Building. The recommendation is also to rename the main entrance at North High School, the John Bowman entrance, and then to differentiate between the two fields. So you see actually 4 recommendations here. The athletic field at Memorial High School, the recommendation is to call it the Connie and Pat Ulrich Memorial Field. And at North High School, it would be the Connie and Pat Ulrich North Field. So as I said, those were the recommendations related to the 3 proposals from the community. The committee also is recommending a revision of policy 940 to include the following. Recommendations shall align with the equity statement of the board. Once named, it shall not be the facility shall not be renamed except for compelling reasons as determined by the board. And if the name or facility or portion of a facility, if the named facility or portion of it is removed, there needs to be a plan to continue recommendation or recognition. And that again would be the purview of the board. And these recommendations will be incorporated into what will be District Policy 7250 as we move to Neola and the Neola policy numbering system. So we're in the middle of that transition now. We started that a couple of months ago where we'll be reviewing all district policies. And this policy aligns with 7250. So I do have the revision and of the proposed language, and then the red in this proposal is what you would see here. So we're actually meeting with our Neola consultant tomorrow morning, and we'll be able to talk through this recommendation. So with that, I will open it up for board discussion.
Yeah. Any questions? Dr. Ferrer?
The comment, I like the idea to change that policy, that it should be in line with the equity commitment. And then I do have a question along the lines of the existing policy on gender balance is the word we use now. Do we have a sense in terms of named buildings, what the current gender balance is of?
We chatted a little bit about that, and the ones that I know of, I only know of males, but I would be speculating at some of them. I don't know the history, for example, of Longfellow. Like maybe I can guess what that is, but I'm not.
He's a famous poet.
Yes, but I don't know.
I know.
I just don't know if that's
my jam, but
I just don't know if that's our Longfellow or if there was another Longfellow.
it's that Longfellow.
Okay.
That Longfellow got schools all across the United States named for him. He was a celebrity at the time. It's a very different time when poetry was popular. But yeah, I would just be interested in there being a kind of formal tallying up of some sort, so that we could meaningfully understand what the current gender balance or imbalance might be in our named facilities.
Okay.
Personally like to hold this recommendation and have it revisited light of an adjustment to the policy for Neola to come forward and have a vote for some reason because of the policy. I guess we'll have to, but I think there's a clear weighting both gender and race naming our buildings and the reasons for that. But I think I would like to see our more representative of our community. I might like to have the recommendations revisited in that view.
I'd like to share a little bit related to that. The first meeting that we had, as Kim said, we adhered to policy. One of the people that I had spoken to when I solicited for people to serve in these roles, when Charles Vu said absolutely, me in this community, his name carries significant weight. Not only as an Eau Claire alum, Memorial alum, I believe, but also a member of the community as a leader of color. And he was the person who had brought that up about with this round. And we will obviously take that recommendation or take that to our group. But, that's the reason why, as Kim had stated, is that we had, I can remember him saying this, the way the policy is stated right now and his work as a board member as well. With these recommendations right now, we have from the community, let's focus on the policy and the rule at this point. After this is complete, then we would do that. But again, Dr. Nordine, I take that respectfully as you're sharing that, and we'll be sharing that with our committee as well.
Okay, that's it. Thank you, Kim. At this time, we'll move on to our regular debrief. Dr. Johnson was the third member of the last agenda setting. And when the third member is not here, that falls to the vice president. So I'm going to take it for tonight. Remember, this is a time for us to reflect on one thing that we did well as a board, as well as one thing that we can continue to keep working on as a board in this time. To how I would like tonight. I'll start with Commissioner Lyons.
Oh. What did we do well? The conversations around how we're trying different things educationally to boost the academic achievement. I mean, can we ever really get enough of that, these meetings? So that was, an area where I think coherent governance, which you've brought to us and has worked really well, focuses this board's attention on things that we need to be focused upon. And this is, kind of personal reflections of, I think coherent governance also, and I said this, I think, at a meeting a couple times ago, it's a tool that we can use and tweak to serve us the best that we, the best that we can. And, I understand the conflict in the fact that I say that this is reasonable, but I disagree with it. Because if it's reasonable, then it isn't against policy. So how, as a board member, can I get into operational? I understand that. I get that totally. But I think that there needs to be some sort of an elastic clause in that calls to us that there's compelling community interest, and this board is elected by the community. And so it might be outside of operation. It might actually be inside of operation, and we need to take some action on it. And that's where, as Commissioner Johnson, and I'll evoke his frozen in our inaction. That's exactly how I felt. And I want to be able to express myself at these meetings, and even if it is into some of the operations, because I think that there's areas which we should be in them, and that is where the conflict with me and coherent governance occurs. So I think that these conversations that we're having are good, and I think that tweaking it is something that, that I would encourage. And it has nothing to do with trust. Chair. It doesn't. It's just a disagreement.
Dr. Farrar.
I also really appreciated the discussion on our students and strategies to assist their achievement. But I also appreciated our conversation as a board. I know we're down a couple of our members this evening, but I appreciated hearing from each other and thinking about ways that we might make our policy work better. I feel optimistic that we are able to do that, and that we are able to do that with a sense of shared commitment and goodwill. All I have to say.
Commissioner Zerk.
I'm just really happy you're here. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You're the first representative to come in person from the Eau Claire Virtual School. So thank you for being here. And you'll catch on to all this lingo and hopefully you can just dive in one of these days. Tell us all your thoughts, but it's nice to meet you. You're welcome. That's all I have to say.
Commissioner Clements.
My first comment is whoever was the chocolate fairy, thank you.
Gary.
Just not here. Helped get to the meeting. I appreciated the dialogue around governance, that bit of dialogue we were able to have. I don't think that those conversations will ever really go away, even as we become more comfortable with our governance policy, because really, although our focus is on student outcomes, we have to figure out how to govern well. And if we're not governing well, then it makes it very difficult to be focused on results. And so I appreciate that we were able to have that conversation.
I think one thing that we continue to do well is approach the job that's ahead of us with intentionality and passion and purpose, even if we have disagreements on which way to go and that sort of a thing. Like, I appreciate each of you coming and being willing to have that conversation. Commissioner Clements said that if we're unable to govern well, then the rest of it does fall apart. I think that I find that each person on this board really comes to that with that intention of doing the best that we can. And certainly, I think we do need to continue to work on that and have those conversations. They may not be great. I may not always as even keeled as I'd like to be. But I think that's maybe what I can continue to work on. With that, I would hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, we're adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between News